Hey there, everybody. Parks Owsley here with Inven Global, and this is the first episode of Esports Weekly, a new podcast that we are starting off here. We're going to be featuring every Wednesday afternoon, so come on back. This is the first episode. We will have guests in the future talking about different things going on in esports. Or serious stuff. We'll have fun and games as well, but this week we figured we'd start off with a couple of Inven Global's finest. So I'm joined by Nick and Lara from LA and all the way over in Germany. It's really late for you. Thank you so much for staying up with us.
I have no choice.
Before we get into everything, I just want to ask, just kind of break the ice a little bit, get everybody talking. What new activity have either of you or each of you gotten into since we've started the isolation? You learning anything new, kind of learning some songs, playing some old games or something, doing anything you've wanted to do?
Well, primarily, I guess something that qualifies as not necessarily new, but something I haven't done as much as I've been just doing like a lot more cooking, trying to get creative with that.
Nice.
Just not having to drive as many places and stuff. Also, can't not really going to restaurants, and I don't want to spend like $1 million on Postmates. So just been trying to upgrade from like gamer snacks to like some actual meals and whatnot. So that's been kind of my main focus outside of all the esports stuff.
I like that.
That's actually pretty awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been cooking much, but I have been playing a lot more League of Legends.
Nice.
I'm still not good at it, but I'm trying my best. And other than that, I just sit on my couch and cry and stay lonely at home. It's been really great to move to Germany and then have like a month and a half of things being great, going outside, seeing a whole new city, and then it's like, by the way, you should stay at home. So I've been at home.
Yeah, well, I said we would talk about some deeper things here, and thank you, Laura, for starting us off with crying on the couch, our first topic of
We all have.
Esports Weekly. No, but that is a good segue into our kind of first segment. I realized I didn't answer. I've actually been doing a lot more cooking as well myself.
Nice.
Just trying to get into it. Just sticking simple right now, but maybe if this lasts long enough, I will be a Ramsey or something. But yeah, so
Maybe not. Who knows, Mark?
probably not. But going on into kind of the first topic, it's what everyone's talking about because it's unavoidable. We are all stuck at home, wherever we may be, and it has changed a lot about kind of the human nature that we're currently able to, I don't know, just have. Our society is
Yes,
changing a
we're
lot.
just wild animals at this point.
um, but it's affecting businesses everywhere, and it's changing things for esports specifically. In a lot of ways, it's a bummer because we don't have big events to go to anymore. We don't have things in real life. Homestands are all canceled. League of Legends all around the world, everything is moved online, and it changes a lot of our jobs as well. We're not getting to talk to people face to face. We have to go on calls or video chats like this. I can't sit, even though Nick and I are 2 miles away, we can't sit next to each other to have this podcast. But in a lot of ways, it's made esports a little bit more interesting and a little bit more available to people that weren't necessarily paying attention before. So I want to kind of talk about both sides of being stuck at home and the coronavirus and how it's affecting esports. So Nick, I'll start with you. What is your personal take on like what this period of time is doing for esports? Both in, the negatives, but kind of looking at the positives as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bummer, right? Like we gotta get that out of the way first, but I do think there are some potential benefits to it in the long run. Like we see in many other industries, I mean, people are kind of freaking out about their investments right now. And I think that if nothing else, this is showing that yes, we did have to bring our tournaments online. Yes, we had to close most of our venues, but esports, I think, has shown that it's able to make that jump. I mean, this is how esports tournaments began before we had, analyst desk people in suits and got like guys like us doing podcasts, right? Like it was just about like
100%.
online, and maybe you had casters if they had a video camera for their casts, like in between games. That was a miracle, right? Like, so I think it's kind of like a return to the roots, even though it's not exactly for ceremonious reasons. And I think there's an opportunity there. I've already seen it with friends of mine who have now gotten into esports because they don't have any sports to watch, and they're like, well, I can either watch reruns of baseball games from years back, which does have its own appeal and historical value, but it doesn't scratch the itch of like watching a competition unfold live in front of you, seeing that happen, being there in that moment. And I think that that's a really, really good opportunity for esports to not only show its versatility on the business side, but like, hey, we are still like thriving. Like, yes, we had a lot of adjustments, but I mean, every League of Legends league is running right now, pretty much. Like every single major one is now running. Once again, yes, it's entirely online. Yes, that does have a slight effect on the quality of the games. But it's not like we're having massive lag spikes or dropouts. I think that tournament organizers, developers, et cetera, have done a pretty good job at making that transition. And I think it's an opportunity for more people to get into esports who have kind of had some of their interests taken away from them for the time being.
People are basically forced to watch it now that there's nothing else. So yes, they will hear about esports. Next year, we won't have to explain what it is. I think that Nikki touched on the point of having everything be behind the screen. And I know that for some teams, that was a big drag because they like to be in front of the stage, so they were not as motivated, and that affected them in that way. But I also know that for teams that had rookie players, they were able to thrive because before then they would play in minor leagues. So that's what they were doing for like years prior. They were just basically set up for that. So they had better results. So I thought it was really interesting, at least here in the LEC, and the way that they handled everything, the way that the production team just delivered the equipment to the casters and to the interviewers, and they would just run it off of their homes and had that sort of comfy feeling. It was interesting to see that did not take away the value of the production. And even with these adversities, we saw a huge viewership increase. So I'm very excited for what is going to become when we're able to go back into the LEC studio, or when we're able to have huge events like Worlds. I think it's just going to get even bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could definitely be interesting in that way. And just to add one more little thing, Park, sorry to cut you off.
No,
But
you're
just,
good.
like it is, you mentioned players handling it differently. There's rookies who are like, oh, I had stage jitters. Now I don't have to worry about that anymore because I'm in my room in my pajamas tearing it up, right? But then there's older players who, like some of the more veteran guys, like on Cloud9, for example. What the Cloud9 did, they have a relatively young team, but some of those guys have been playing big stages for a while now, and they actually like took a separate room in their gaming house and like facilitated the sort of walk to the stage. Like they had a separate room for playing with different setups, like a whole setup of 5 different computers. And like, so I think it's also interesting to see how teams are adapting to like this new form of competition. And obviously it's going to be different, but I think like how esports can handle this is going to speak volumes for its future, I think, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Good addition. I think I recently spoke with Andrew Barton, who is the general manager for Evil Geniuses, who recently joined the league. And I talked to him a lot about the business side of esports and its organizations, because there's been some concern about, we don't have these live events. We're having to cancel all of these things that actually generate a lot of the revenue for the league. And they, without having the big live events, maybe people are less interested because there's not as much fanfare. However, he actually was not concerned for the future of the business side, which made me a little bit more, confident in, what's going to happen for my future as someone who works here in the industry. But he made some pretty interesting points about like the ESPN deal. That may not have happened if we had basketball and baseball and all these other things going on. Taking up all the time. So, looking specifically at the business side, are there any specific worries that either of you have? Like, maybe the, cancellation of Evo or something like that, or the more community driven things where everyone's looking forward to one big event. Maybe something like that has more of a downside than League of Legends, where there's a ton of money and they can just move it all online. Any kind of specific call outs on, the business side of this, either positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bringing up Evo is a good point because, it's probably not going to happen, So, as far as we know right now, the in-person event is canceled, and fighting games being a one-on-one competition are so precise. Like, like we've heard pro players in multiple games talk about how like they just like simply like practicing on net play is it's just not valuable compared to being able to play in person. There's such a difference in those games, but I mean, at the same time, if there's one scene that has like survived the test of time all on its own, it's the fighting game community. So I think like really like the thing that's interesting to me is like I'm like they're gonna be fine because they're cockroaches, they're immortal, like they're gonna be fine. And the leagues who actually have financial standing, as we've seen with like the major League of Legends leagues, LCS, LEC, etc., have pivoted successfully as a business. I think what's going to be interesting is we're going to see who's here for the right reasons and who's not, because I think that people who are simply looking for just to turn, and there are people out there, there are people, venture capitalists, angel investors who come in who really, really are passionate about the space, do their homework, make sure they're talking to the right people, approach it in the right way. And then there's the other type of people in those venture capitalist kind of relationships and stuff. And I think that this may turn off some people just because right now is a risky time to be investing in anything, right? But I also think that those who understand that esports is poised to make it through this as well as anywhere else, if not better, that like the people who really do their homework on the industry and are in it for the right reasons, I think are going to stick around. So we might see some weeding out, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bad thing. It could be a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm. And Laura, I know you
That's
have
true.
more insight in the European side of things. How's it looking over there?
I was actually going to say, just to not lose the train of thought that Nick just had, that the leagues that had handled this correctly or that had the most luck, because I do think that it plays together in this situation. There's a lot at stake when it comes to like dealing with a pandemic. But I think that leagues like Flashpoint or League of Legends, they will be safe and they will still receive investment because they have been able to still produce their products. But yeah, I definitely think that leagues like the Overwatch League that had already seen a decline, this was just how many nails on their coffin are we going to have at this point? It just feels like they keep getting kicked on the ground. And I think I would be amazed if I saw a league like that move on. And Nick is right, the FGC is super resilient. And with that, I would like to touch on the subject. Actually, Amanda Stevens was talking about how the FGC people that are involved in working in it, not necessarily the companies that produce the events, but the freelancers are being affected by that. And here in Europe, I had already seen a lot of freelancers unfortunately have to look for other opportunities because it's difficult times, especially for outlets that are not super established. It is difficult for them to justify continuing the creation of content without going into the studio and doing all the other content that they're doing. So the business implications of this, they're monumental, I think. I think it will be good for some, but there's so many people losing. And we are going to, unfortunately, probably lose a lot of good people that work in this industry that do good journalistic work because they won't be able to hold themselves up. And I understand these are trying times, and those that are able to stay are lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of people who create content in this space who either, just freelance all over the place or juggle it with like a daytime job. Like one of my favorite things about esports is that I think there's so many different ways you can choose on how you can choose to exist in it. And I will say that aspect of it has become more narrow for I think the average professional. I think that's definitely something that I overlooked in my previous point.
Yeah. And I think, when I was talking with Andrew Barton, we were concentrating on things like sponsorships, which in his opinion is actually beneficial right now because there are more people watching esports than ever, and no one is competing necessarily. So sponsors are really eager to invest. But Lara, you bring up a really good point that not all of us are getting these sponsorship dollars. And the
True.
freelancers and the smaller sites, the community driven, parts, the pieces of esports, they're not necessarily receiving a lot of these benefits that we have. So, that's something that we're going to have to look out for. And I think one of the most beautiful things about our community is that we are a community. And so, some of the specific callouts that you had for the freelancers experiencing trouble have been getting some help and support from the community that I think will bring us closer. So there are positives and negatives to both sides, and it's really tough, but we'll see. We'll band together. Hopefully we'll all make it through. But thank you for the reminder on that. Kind of keep us humbled as well, since we are so lucky to continue. The other kind of big thing I want to talk about in regards to the coronavirus situation is this kind of like asterisk that it may or may not put on everything happening in esports right now. And we don't really have to go too long into this, but what do you both think about, looking back at this season in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Will people look at Cloud9's run in the LCS and say, yes, that is 100% the exact same as Team Liquid's run the year before, or G2's run? And will we look at this year with a different lens? And is it just going to be a different lens, or is it going to be a devaluing lens? Nick, I'll start with you. Sorry.
I think it really, it depends on the scope of context, right? Like from a broad perspective, you can't say there's not an asterisk on this year, because there is, like, no matter how you want to spin it. But like, and so yeah, like when it comes to Cloud9's, for example, their 17-1 regular season in the LCS spring split this year, their dominance in the playoffs, there's an asterisk next to that. However, when you look at specifics of certain things, right? I think that if this whole pandemic hadn't happened, I think Cloud9 wins the LCS as easily, if not easier anyway. I think that when you look at specific things, there isn't as much of an effect on like maybe specific outcomes, like case by case. But in general, I mean, it is going to play a factor. Like, does G2 really lose to Mad Lions? Not to step into Lars territory here with LEC, but does G2 really lose to Mad Lions?
Yeah, they do.
Do they though? Because it's like,
but they did it on stage. They did it on stage, and they did it online.
Okay,
so,
then,
yeah,
I mean, for me, I'm just thinking like being on stage, having that battle testedness is so important. Having that adjustment to be able to win. Some teams definitely adjusted better than others, and some who even adjusted well just took some time to adjust well. We saw FlyQuest in the first week of playoffs, their first online playoffs match ever, right? Get beat by Evil Geniuses in the LCS, and then in the 2 weeks later, they had their number. They destroyed them, right? So I think that like it's definitely like an asterisk, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like the teams themselves are like worse or bad, or that like, it's not like, oh, Cloud9 didn't deserve their title. Like there's no black and white broad strokes you can paint in like that regard. But I think that, yeah, it's going to be looked at as slightly less impressive than some equally dominant runs. Thinking about 2 different LCS seasons of 17-1 records, Immortals in the 2016 NALCS spring split, and the split after that summer, TSM did the same thing. I think that those will be looked at as arguably more impressive just on the numbers, because they did it all offline. And again, I don't think it would have changed Cloud9's dominance at all in the space of the LCS, because everyone's getting affected by the same things. But it definitely adds an asterisk in the broad sense.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I think it's also interesting to see that at least in this split of the LEC, there were so many teams that had to deal with adversities, like Shaka with the situation with Forgiven and bringing 2 of their academy players over and having to adapt them to the stage, and actually overcoming all that situation in the beginning of the split and getting better and getting their dominance, quote unquote, back. TBD, we'll see it in summer. But yeah, when you bring up that, like, yes, I do think that Mad Lions definitely got a little bit boosted because they spoke to me in interviews and all of them had the same thing to say, and they said yes, playing online is easier, at least now that, like, for now that they're rookies. In the future, I'm sure that will change, but when you have players talking openly about that, it's very interesting to trace, like, the picture. I don't think it diminishes why they made it to playoffs in the first place, because when they were playing on stage, they still were good and they still were dominant. But
No, they're good. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, and it's so lovely to see. But yeah, you just look at Fnatic and G2's run in the playoffs as well. Like, could you just blame it on the pandemic? I think not.
No, like it doesn't change the actual reality of what happened, but like, did Mad Lions in playoffs may perform a little better than we expected because for their rookie players didn't have to deal with stage jitters? Absolutely. Does that mean that they didn't deserve to be in playoffs? Then of course not. It's not that black and white, but there is definitely gray area. So I'm glad that you brought that up, especially since you've been speaking to some of the teams who I think have both benefited and also suffered the most, at least in the LEC specifically.
G2 was also at trying times with swapping the roles of perks and caps, so they already had that to overcome, plus this whole situation of all the players already loving to be on stage. So I just think it's very interesting.
It has for sure been an interesting season, even despite the coronavirus. Just talking about all the player swaps, Team Liquid, who everybody expected to do so great, had multiple visa issues and motivational issues, etc., that no one expected, and that wasn't at all a part of this whole coronavirus madness. So in a lot of ways, actually, when I spoke to Dash earlier, he said the asterisk would probably be the fact that Team Liquid was a 9th place team, not that the coronavirus happened. So that'll be interesting, and monitoring them will be interesting in the future. And actually, let's talk about them now. They have a really interesting story going on alongside TSM and kind of how those weave together. So for those who are unaware, I don't know how you could be, but if you follow League of Legends, Esports, Doublelift was traded to TSM from Team Liquid.
Was he?
He was. It has been confirmed as far as I know. I don't think it's all a joke. But if it is, it would be a really interesting one. I don't know if it would be a good one, but
very long April Fools.
I don't want to get too deep into all of that, but there are some interesting implications around that trade and how it has been managed by the league and how TSM will manage that going forward. There are questions around conflict of interest. Doublelift is dating the president of TSM. Bjergsen is also a player owner. They have 3 members of their team on the Players Association board, which all of these things in isolation and when handled well are non-factors or not really issues, but they all have the potential to have an issue. So I just think that monitoring TSM is going to be important this year, just kind of seeing what's happening. Not that anything bad will, but there's a potential for it. I'm really curious about the Doublelift trade, though, because I don't know if he's the answer to their problems. So to kind of just move on to that, Nick, because you are the brightest, smartest LCS coverer that I know, what do you think about Doublelift's move purely from a roster standpoint, a strength standpoint?
I think it's impossible to say it doesn't make them better. And I know that sounds like I'm slighting Copy, but it's not. And I guess I think that that's my main issue with people's understanding of this. Everyone thinking that Doublelift getting signed is a bad idea because it screws over Cobby or Cobby didn't do anything wrong. And I agree. I think Cobby didn't play his best split, but I don't think that he was the problem with TSM, or I don't think there's even one specific problem with that roster. It's not like they have like a weak point player, in my opinion. I think they're pretty well rounded in the sense that they're all pretty much on the same page. Just that page, sometimes they all 5 suffer in the same areas as a roster. Like they have a lot of coordination when they draft for these early games, but sometimes the late game, they just don't really seem to have a decisiveness in what to do. Not even just like making the best call, just make a call, do something. You know what I mean? Because That's what High was famous for as a shot caller to get back in the legendary Cloud9 days. You talk to players, and it wasn't that he was, it wasn't that he was like a chess master all the time. It was sometimes that he would flip a coin and he'd be more willing to flip it faster than you. And if you couldn't respond, it wouldn't matter if it was 50-50 play because he'd already won it. And I think that is decisive that Doublelift brings. If Doublelift like a master macro, like incredible, like shot calling mind? No. Will he say the right things, have the experience, and know what call to make more than anyone else in that roster previously? Absolutely, yes. I don't think it's about Doublelift stepping into the bot lane in place of Kabi. It's about Doublelift coming back as the spiritual leader that he was on TSM before this, that he was on Team Liquid the last 2 years. Like it's all the other factors. And yeah, I do think he can objectively be a better bot laner than Kabi. I think that he has shown that before. I think he's also shown that he can make more mistakes. But he does have the experience in North America. It makes all the sense for TSM to reunite with him, and with, all the things happening with Team Liquid regarding like their internal issues. Doublelift admittedly lost his motivation during the first half of the split, got it back, but clearly it seemed like too little too late. The writing was kind of on the wall there, in my opinion. So I think it makes perfect sense. And while I do think that Kabi got the raw end of the deal, I don't think it was like, oh, well, Kabi needs to be upgraded. Kabi is a problem. I just think that Kabi is good, and Doublelift is a unique talent that TSM is familiar with personally, both like from their actual people in their company, but also because, like I said, he was there for 2 full years, one of the most dominant stints they've had as an organization ever. So I think that it definitely can make their team better. However, it does mean that they do have some aspects of balancing to work out. TSM was the most top lane focused team in the spring split, the only team that focused around top more than bot. Dardoch did a great job at getting Broken Blade off the ground, who is an incredible carry player when he's allowed to be versatile and play his own style, and kind of they let him do his thing and play a bunch of stuff. But if you just put him on weak side on Aatrox every game, he's not bad at that, but he's not going to be at his best. And so I think TSM will have like an economy thing where they're going to have to balance stuff. Last time we saw Doublelift on TSM, they had the same problem in summer where Hanser wasn't playing as well as he could have probably been because he was used to playing higher resource with Wild Turtle on the roster previously. And then it's an adjustment. So I think it's that the roster itself has the potential to be better than the previous one. But that isn't necessarily because of just Kabi or because Doublelift like presses buttons better than he does.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially the Wild Turtle point with Hanser there. They're definitely going to need to adjust, and it'll be interesting to see if Doublelift is on his first team, the first roster, where people aren't immediately saying it's a bot-focused team. Because if they can continue to focus top, or if they can shift focus depending on the game and the draft that they have, if we ever get to the point where people don't say, oh yeah, Doublelift is a bot-focused team player or whatever, then I think that would be a pretty big win for them.
This also might be
a little bit curious. Ooh.
Nope. All you. I've talked plenty about this.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that I am a little bit curious to see how he's going to fight that demotivation that he had, because he is being faced with a lot of criticism, and there is no way that this is not affecting them and him specifically, not just the fact that Lena and him are together and there's a lot of controversy around that. I'm sure that is a big stressor in them, and I want to see how that is going to pan out in the first weeks. I'm just curious about that.
I think that it's gonna like depend a lot on how much of it is going to be like, is this Doublelift's team? Like, because he really was like Tyler Erzberger over at ESPN had a great piece where Bjergsen was the front runner for MVP a few years back, and he had this whole column on why he thought Doublelift should get it instead, even though they were on the same team, and it was all these out-of-game factors and how, like, spiritually, like, Bjergsen was the ace. He's the hardest working player. He was, like, the cold Zera for my CSGO fans out there, if you will.
Nice.
But then we had Doublelift, who was, like, like, following, like, the face, like, talking to the fans, saying the right things, knowing how to, like, kind of gather the team. He's that type of leader. And so it's going to be a matter of like, how much is he going to be allowed to do that? And then how will that sit with the other players? Like, Broken Blade's never played with Doublelift before, and Broken Blade has two different modes where he looks pretty good when he's playing weak side. When he's playing strong side, he looks like one of the best players in North America. Like, he looks insane when he's allowed to carry on some of these champions. So I think it really is going to be like, how much of this is Doublelift's team, like, metaphorically speaking, and how that works with the individual pieces. I don't think motivation will be an issue because Double finished in 9th last spring, and I don't think that he is going to let that sit. And I think that he'll be very, very eager to, so a stream clip resurfaced in the offseason when he first moved to Team Liquid from TSM, and he said, I want to make sure TSM never wins anything ever again. And I think that basically you can take that nameplate out and put it with TL, because I don't think he's a professional. He's happy to be back at TSM. Yeah. I can't imagine he's stoked about how the spring went. And I think that'll be a fantastic motivator, if nothing else.
I hope so.
I agree. I think that's a good point. On the flip side, Team Liquid, of course, made some changes. They're bringing up tactical, it looks like. There's always a possibility that they make further changes. We still have about a month left of the offseason. But they've announced that they are starting tactical, which is great news for him. And he did look great in his first 2 games and fine in his third one, though they did lose that third one that he got to play this season. But more interestingly than that, they're bringing in Jet, the longtime color caster, the analyst, the stats guy. They're bringing him in and shifting Kane's role from head coach to a strategic coach, making Jat the head coach. That's what's really interesting to me, and I don't know if that's going to fix their problems. I don't think that Team Liquid ever, even when they were very dominant, I don't think they ever looked at the top of the meta, that they were ever good at shifting and adapting, and I think that's why they suffered so much internationally. I don't necessarily think it was player strength, because specific players would have amazing tournaments, but they would lose games consistently, I think, based on adaptation. And I don't know, I mean, Jat is great when he's on the desk. I don't know how great he's going to be behind a team. So what are your thoughts on that pickup? And what are you hoping to see from Jat and Team Liquid as far as their style and their coaching? Nick, I'll start with you because you're the LCS guy.
Nick is the LCS.
That's why we have you here.
I feel like Kane was kind of like, I do think that there were criticisms, rightful criticisms leveled at Team Liquid's drafts over the last calendar year, specifically this spring. I know a lot of people like to point towards K's, their former analyst, joining Origin being a big factor in that. But I mean, also, when you have a team that good and you've won 4 splits in a row, pretty much anything besides perfection is gonna be like, well, this coach clearly sucks, right? So I don't know enough about the inner workings of Team Liquid to say like if Kane or could have done better or anything like that. But what I do know is that I am here for trying a new approach. And what I think about Team Liquid is there's a couple things. Jat has worked in so many aspects. He's kind of like Lara, like an esports Swiss Army knife, like you guys can do everything. Jat, for those of you guys who don't know, in addition to all of his casting and all of his analyst desk work and all that stuff, Jat was a professional jungler on Dignitas before season 1 started, like way back, right? And he also headed up the balance team at Riot for the competitive side of the game for the better part of a year. So I think that he's incredibly versatile. And I also think that Team Liquid reminds me of a 2015 Origin. They don't necessarily need a spiritual leader coach. They have these veterans. They have these guys who have been like, they have world champions, guys who've been to the world finals. Like, and I think that Jat doesn't need to like put his foot down as much as he just needs to be like, no, this is ridiculous. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't have to be the defining voice. He just has to be able to provide his insights, which I think that if you look at him on the desk, he's done a great job. Here we have a coach who has a keen understanding of the differences between what works in other regions and what works in our region. So that's one thing. So I think that he'll have a very, very good understanding of how to work with both the Korean players, the European players, and the North American players in the roster. So I think that in that regard, he does come with a very well-rounded perspective. And I also think that he won't try to do too much, which is not a phrase I like to use with coaches. I think a lot of the time a coach needs to be more authoritative, but I think this is one of those times where it's not. You look at the experience on this team. I think this team just needs to like have a coach who can provide the opinions they need strategically, give them data, and work with them, and also understand like the differences in working with, these different personalities. And it's been Jat's job to analyze narratives around how these guys respond to different circumstances for years and years. And his strategic knowledge should never come into question, in my opinion. So I think that it could not work at all. He's never done this before, but I do think that like it's a very, very interesting move. And I can't think of actually like like a smarter, more interesting candidate, because I think it's, at the very least, it's a new approach, and it may be a way for Team Liquid to reach a ceiling that we haven't seen before, especially with like their new roster is going to have a whole culture shift like this. Like, let's just talk about how this is a new face and a familiar face some of players, right? Like they know Jat, they don't know him as a coach, but they know Jat. And so I think it could be really helpful for the cultural reset. And I think that, frankly, if this team gets their culture together, like it's going to be impossible for them not to be a top 2 team. I mean, Cloud9 looks really strong. I'm not saying Team Liquid's an immediate contender. We'll have to see how Tactical turns out. But I mean, look at the talent on this team, right? Like I don't think that too much has to happen for them to succeed domestically. And I think Jad will know how to split the difference on like picking his battles on what to do and when.
Mm-hmm. So overall, you would say positive change then for them picking up Jad.
I love it. I love it because not only do I think it works, but I also like to see organizations taking a different approach to these coaching positions. Like in the 2014 NALCS, coaches weren't even mandatory. We had I think Cloud9 had a coach, and that was it, right? Like, so just to let you guys know, yeah, we have these guys on salaries now, and it's easy to be like, yeah, they're in suits. We got coaches, but I'm like, LCS coaching is like a 5-year-old thing. It is a toddler who just got fully potty trained. Okay, so the way that I see it is like, I like Team Liquid for being like, well, we already have really good players. Let's push the envelope on how we can change our staff around. And I'm glad that they took that risk. And frankly, even though I didn't, it wasn't my first choice, I think sticking with Tactical, I know we didn't really touch on that. I know we're talking mostly about Jad. I think sticking with Tactical is cool. I think that Core JJ is a great mentor. He's played in both North America and Korea. I think Tactical could become like the next great North American AD carry, with the tutelage of Core JJ surrounded by these veterans. We've seen that dynamic work before, and I'm really excited to see how it'll play out.
And another point for Tactical, he started off on TSM under Sven, and then he moved to Liquid under Doublelift. And though Doublelift didn't have the best split of his life this year, he was still Doublelift, and him as a person was likely giving tips, helping him out. And I know Tactical's worked a lot with Core JJ already, so I agree. I think that he has the potential, based on his academy performance, the people above and around him, has the potential to be the next great American or North American ADC. And Lara, I'm going to skip over you, but we're coming to you right now. I want to move on.
Problem.
I want to move on to I figure that's probably fine with you. I want to move on to talking about Valorant, Riot Games' other big new game. One of the 2 that kind of put the S at the end of Riot Games this year, along with Legends of Runeterra, which is doing great, just had its first expansion. We could talk about that later. Valorant is all the rage right now. We've been seeing tons of...
How old are you, Park? All the rage?
It's all the rage. I'm hip and young. It's been seeing, not hundreds, but soon hundreds of, tournaments run by ESPN, and, this org put one together. This org put one together. And every time there are more and more people watching it. It has been the highest average viewed channel on Twitch, or category on Twitch, since it launched. Every single day, it is the highest. Wow. Even when League of Legends had, the LPL is playing in the finals, the LCS, Cloud9, G2 Fnatic are playing. Doesn't matter. Valorant still has more average views on the day, which is incredible. So I wanted to start off with that. The game is taking off, and we're still in closed beta. We still have bugs everywhere. There's a bunch of problems that they're still going to fix, but it looks really strong right out the gate. I first want to talk about the esports scene, because Riot recently announced that they're not going to have the same format that they do for League of Legends. It's not going to be this... we have 10 teams and they're each going to play each other a bunch of times, and then we're going to have playoffs and it looks like football or basketball or whatever. It's going to be more like the CSGO thing, where they have multiple tournaments and each of them have different levels of points and weight. And I'm curious what both of your opinion is on how they're structuring it. Because while it's unfamiliar to Riot, it's more familiar to maybe the CSGO players or viewers who are going to be watching. And I'm curious to see what turns out. So Lara, I'll start with you. I know that you've been much more invested in Valorant than Nick. So what are your thoughts on the esports scene?
I think that the fact that this is something that's not so familiar to Riot shouldn't be as much of a problem, because Riot is a company that has the power, and not just the financial power, but the influential power of hiring anyone in the industry that has been an expert in the subject. So I am 100% certain that they are going to take the right steps to make sure that this looks smooth. And the game is beautiful. It's easy to keep up with, as opposed to Overwatch that I recall. I love the Overwatch League, but going into the arena or just watching online and keeping up with all those colors and all those, I don't know, those particles and those characters and all those little voices, it was just so confusing. And it was almost motion sickness inducing, and Valorant doesn't have that. So it's very friendly to the users. It looks a lot more like CSGO, which is something that I'm sure the fans will appreciate. And they know exactly who they're catering to, right? They know that they want to bring people in from this game. So it totally makes sense that the tournaments are going to be similar, because I think it maybe like in hopes that eventually CSGO is going to die down, although I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, not even with Valorant. I think that it's very smart of them to set this type of model and to also be so supportive of their community. Hello, Nintendo. Maybe you can learn a thing or two from them.
Thank you for the Nintendo call out. I'm Nick. You probably have some things to say about that.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, no. Skipping over that.
Episode just about Nintendo.
That's a whole other story.
Thank you for the single sentence was just the right amount for this one. Nick, I'm curious about the speed of what's happening, because we are still in closed beta, as a reminder, and we've had all of these tournaments. You know, the meta is shifting already, of course, and even calling it a meta is a little bit weird because we're still in closed beta. Let me remind you again. But we've already seen a bunch of people switch over to call themselves professional Valorant players, whether it be orgs signing people as players rather than streamers, players themselves dropping out of their own career in whatever game it may be. Sinatra, I think, is probably the biggest name so far. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know CSGO as well, but this guy just got MVP in Overwatch League, and halfway through the season calls himself a Valorant pro, stops playing Overwatch, and we're, as far as I know, not close to having the esports scene officially set up yet. What is your take on how quickly people are jumping into this?
I mean, first of all, yeah, you're right. Sinatra is the big one. I mean, no disrespect to any CSGO pros, retired CSGO pros who moved over, but most of the big names have been retired. Players who are now finding new light, which is really great to see, right? Cloud9 signed Tens, former CSGO player for them, streamer for them, and he's now the first player to ever hit the Valorant rank. That happened last week. So I think it's really cool to see the game sort of, like you said, sort of take off. Like, we're in closed beta, but it almost feels like, instead of it being like behind black and yellow tape, it almost feels like the game itself burst through that tape, and it's running, and the tape is still stuck to it, and it's blowing in the wind, but it's just this line of tape, and it's saying, we're in beta, but are we though? You know what I mean?
I'm envisioning this.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I think Riot's basically giving the full game out, saying it's closed beta and taking all the feedback. And I think that's a perfectly fine approach. I think I know it's officially a closed beta, but I mean, we're having invitationals every other day hosted by organizations. We're having pro signings, and I think it's okay for Valorant to sort of pick up the speed and run with what the scene is doing. Back to Sinatra, I mean, that's got to be the one that is wow, because this isn't just a guy who's oh yeah, he was on the Overwatch League All-Star team. He's pretty good. This guy is the Overwatch League player, right? He was the MVP of last season on the winningest playoff team in the history of Overwatch League. And I think that him switching over like this, it just sends a big ripple effect statement, because not so much because of the likelihood of what Valorant is, but it's man, if the best pro, if the top pro at Overwatch League, what does it say about the Overwatch League right now? That's the thing I'm concerned about. And
that's the 50th nail on their coffin.
Yeah, it's and does he still get his MVP skin like Jonak did when they I don't I don't know, like this guy's a champion and the regular season MVP. He was the star player of the best team we've ever seen in Overwatch. And props to the Sentinels. I think that, yeah, obviously with things being this early, it's a risk. But I mean, this is also, for those of you who don't know, Sentinels started out as a little League of Legends team no one cared about called Phoenix One. And they went from doing that to rebranding, working with the Los Angeles Gladiators for a time. And now they have XQC, a very popular streamer, and another former Overwatch League pro. They have Booga, who is the Fortnite world champion. And now they have Sinatra. And I think that they're comfortable in the fact that, while not every pro player, like, oh, I'm now a new Valorant player, like, yeah, not everyone should start throwing that in their bio already. If there's one person who can be like, yeah, that's me, I'm doing that, it's definitely Sinatra. Like, his skills transfer over to the game perfectly. I agree with Laura. The game is more similar to CSGO than Overwatch. People think it's like, oh, it's like Overwatch but slower. I'm like, actually, it's CSGO but with abilities.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Like you can, there's econ, there's guns, and it's not. Overwatch has, like you said, there's a lot of different colors, people flying around it. It's like Alice in Wonderland esports. It's crazy, right?
It's Valorant on LSD.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that while he is an Overwatch pro, his skills transfer over like super, super well. But again, I mean, like, that doesn't mean I think it'd be weird to see a bunch of teams sign a bunch of like just, oh yeah, let's, like, if anybody signs like a full Valorant squad the next week, I'm just gonna laugh at them. You know what I mean? Because I don't think that we know enough about the game on a team level. I think the Sentinels can say Sinatra's a huge name. Sinatra is worth our time, worth our money, and wherever we build around him, he will be a valuable asset to us as a Valorant player. Now, we don't know how team dynamics are going to work. I mean, imagine if this was the onset of League of Legends and someone was like, I'm going to sign these 5 guys. And it's like, oh, wait, they're all mid laners, it turns out. That doesn't work, We don't even know what that
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, unless you're G2, then you sign a million mid laners and everything's fine. But but we don't really know what the competitive landscape of the game looks like from a team perspective. And this is Riot Games. This is a team game. No matter how good Sinatra is, Sentinels will have to build around him. So I think that seeing teams make these surefire signings, like I think that if Valorant succeeds, Sinatra will be one of the top talents in it. I think that that's perfectly fine. But I do think that there are some people jumping the gun on, oh, we're just going to sign this guy because he's high on the ladder and Valorant's like the new hotness. Like, Sinatra's already been established in multiple games. People don't know he was semi-pro for a while in CSGO and like played in some like pro series tournaments before Overwatch even happened when he was like 15 years old. So I think taking established talents who've proven that they can like be good at these types of games for a while, they have an established brand, they know that people are watching them, they know exactly how all that works, that's fine. But I think that anyone looking to sign like a full team or going too fast in that regard should hold off. But I do like that organizations are holding invitationals. That shows they want to see what the game looks like from different perspectives at a top competitive level. And frankly, it's a good way for talent to be scouted. And personally, I would love to see some like mechanical, like old school League of Legends gods. I want Forgiven to just say screw it and become a Valorant pro like tomorrow.
He's been playing a lot. I see in his Instagram stories.
He's really good at CSGO. For those of you who don't know, if you're a League of Legends Forgiven fan, he reached Grandmaster. Like, that guy's just good at video games. He reached Grandmaster CSGO like every single season. So I think
really good at this game. Marek, he is fantastic. Humanoid from Mad Lions. He just carries it. Playing with him, insane, super crazy, and he's been playing every single day. All these league players are also interested in it. When I was at All Star, I spoke to an esports agent, which I will not name, but back then he was already telling me that his Overwatch talent was coming to him and saying, hey, when is Project A going to be done? Like, we want out.
Wow.
So I think that says a lot about what was going on then, and this shift to me is not surprising at all.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk more about Overwatch next week and the problems that it has. We have a guest coming on who is a little bit more ingrained in that scene than I am, for sure, and really than both of you all are.
Fair enough.
Although, Nick, you know a lot about everything, so I don't want to discredit that. You're talking about Sinatra when he's 15 years old, and when that was, I don't know, I was not even in esports at the time, so thank you for that. But yeah, I think that kind of does it for this as far as I'm concerned. Lara, if you have any other thoughts on the speed, if you have any like downsides of all of it. Nick, I know you focused a lot on how it's really cool and amazing to watch and you think it's healthy. Lara, if you think they need to chill out, let me know. What are your thoughts? Do you just agree with Nick? You think they should just keep going full steam ahead?
I think they are, yeah, regardless of what I think, people are going to keep going full steam ahead. I think that
Sure.
it's the truth. I think that there is a downside that I see to this, and it is that I can see a lot of organizations signing people just for the popularity, and I can see that might oversaturate the scene. I don't know how beneficial this is going to be for the ecosystem of the league in the long run, but I am not particularly worried about Sinatra, like he said, because he already played CSGO and he was excellent at Overwatch. And overall, he's a pretty great figure to have just in terms of like the person that he is. So I'm wondering if this is going to end up attracting, like, I don't know, I'm not going to say unwanted attention, but almost like we could have, I don't know, have it be too much hype in the beginning, very much like Fortnite was. It was gargantuan, and now I have a feeling like it's dying down like crazy. I think that this is going to be inevitable. So I would like to see this hype being nurtured the right way. I don't mind it so much blowing up this way because I think that companies like Epic were able to handle it, and I'm sure that companies like Riot Games will have the right professionals to be able to handle it too. But really, if you ask me this question 2 months from now, maybe my answer will completely change.
I have a question for both of you actually about this before we wrap up here. Because I think that like I think Sinatra, like we said, is going to be fine. I think that, but is he the exception or is he the example? Like, let me ask you guys this. Do you think that the hype for Valorant in terms of people turning to maybe be more willing to call themselves pros and all that stuff, has that pace been accelerated by the current state of the Overwatch League and the surrounding perception of it? Like if the Overwatch League was still considered the way it was in 2018, based on what I'm saying is Sinatra might have left regardless of that, but I'm saying, is Sinatra the exception or the example? Are we seeing this accelerated pace because of people talking about the Overwatch League being on decline, or do you think it's just because Valorant is so hype it wouldn't have mattered anyway?
I think he's definitely the exception. I think that a lot of talent, unfortunately, especially the ones that do come from the Overwatch League, although I don't know if there's going to be that much crossover from the Overwatch League comparing to CSGO, I think they're going to be treated as if they were disposable. I fear that talent will be seen in a way that they can just be the first ones to be set for now because they do have big names and they have, like a big following, and their streams are going to carry the situation. But I wonder what's going to happen to players that are actually like, going to be fostered in this ecosystem and are going to be good at the game, but unfortunately they don't have the same chances and the same opportunities to develop. Like what's going to happen to this talent that could be joining the game, basically.
No, that makes perfect sense.
That is a good point.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing, I'm just mostly just concerned on whether this is a bubble that pops. With all the hype going now, it's hard to contain or to continue that level of excitement. We have a tournament every single day, and more we're signing more people. Eventually we're going to run out of big names to sign, and we're going to run out of people to have tournaments, and we're going to run out of $20,000 prize money to give away so that people get invested. And that's kind of my only concern, is that in a month from now, we're still going to be in closed beta. We're not going to have the esports scene ready, and it's not going to be the most, average, highest watched on Twitch every single day for the next month. Likely. I mean, maybe it will be, but at some point that's going to fall off. And I just hope that we haven't set it up too high right now, that it just kind of falls off and then doesn't do anything. I'd like to see a constant nurturing of it rather than give it everything right now, 100%, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're not. We don't even know where the finish line is, and it's not even the finish line. It's the starting line. We're racing to the starting line, and we're gonna get tired before we get there. So
it might just be a 5K. We don't even know how many miles it's gonna be, right? And to that point, really quick here, just I think that like you guys both brought up Overwatch and Fortnite, which I do agree that CS:GO is like the sister game to Valorant as far as how it plays. But I think Fortnite has been relatively underwhelming from a competitive standpoint recently, but its game itself has been massive. Overwatch League, I think, had fantastic infrastructure built for an esport, but the game itself failed to live up to the expectations set by those esports infrastructural, inlays, so to speak. So what Riot Games is good at is making a game accessible. You said I don't have interest in Valorant, Parks, and that's right. I haven't played it yet. I still don't have a PC right now. Actually, my buddy is actually a custom PC builder. He's currently building me one, and it's not going to be that expensive because, like League of Legends, Valorant is very easy to play on just about any specs. It is free to play.
I can run it in my MSI laptop. It's nuts.
There you go. Right, and so I think that where they can split the difference and succeed is that. Yes, I think that if Valorant just borrows, veteran talent from other games, and that's how we make our scene, then that's not going to work. But I do believe because what Riot Games is best at is making a game accessible to everyone worldwide. Yes, I think it will be dependent on whether the scene can grow organically in addition to these big names coming over, right? Otherwise it's just a super group, and we all know how those bands sound. But I do think that if there's someone poised to do that right, then Riot has proven that they are the best at that, and they might be able to split the difference between where we've seen those other titles succeed and fail and actually check all the boxes.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you both. I think we are nearing our time to sign off. We are actually going to talk a lot more about Valorant next week as well. Specifically some more of the problems that I think it may have. Already looking at the esports scene, one thing that Riot has been criticized of on the counterpoint to you there, Nick, is the way that it handles the community of its players, of its player base. Voyboy actually specifically just called them out this week, which was a kind of a really big hit because of how his history of positivity and he focuses on mental health. He focuses on making things more fun, on putting aside, this guy is trolling or he's being toxic. It doesn't matter because I'm playing my game and I'm just building Frozen Mallet on these guys and we chillin'. And for him to put out a video that's this, direct towards Riot was big news. And they've already also had problems with Valorant. The game is still in closed beta, and everywhere people are talking about the toxicity, the people just disconnecting from games 4 rounds in because there's no punishment there. We don't really have much information on the reporting system. And I actually reported someone, and they got back to me and said, hey, we are working on this. We don't have as many materials as we would like to. It's the coronavirus, the game just launched, whatever, but keep reporting because it works. And so I hope that it does. And I got feedback that it does, but also that they still have to build it up.
Right.
But yeah,
that's a good point.
We're gonna dive more into that next week. Kind of look more at the specifics of the solo queue and how Riot Games handles some of their community. We're also going to look more at Overwatch, like I was saying. We've got a guest there. He knows a lot more than I do, for sure. So that'll be kind of fun. So look out next Wednesday. We're going to dive into both of these games, continue covering stuff that happens throughout the weekend and into next week. So thank you all so much for watching so far. Nick and Lara, do you have anything to say before you go? Lara, I'll start with you. It's like your bedtime, I know.
I would like to go to bed. I'm just kidding. It was awesome to talk about this. And my message is first to you guys. I miss you guys in NA so much. It's crazy.
Oh,
and no. It's super true. And I think this was a really positive experience to reunite with the team and to be able to talk our thoughts about, not just newsing things impartially, but to be able to actually give our opinions. I think this is really cool. And to have people here that want to listen to what we're saying, that's super sweet of you guys. So I appreciate everyone around. And if you guys have any, topic ideas or anything that you want to hear us discussing, or if you want any special guests in our show, just make sure that you tweet at Inven Global, and we'll definitely try our best to attend your wishes.
Yeah, I just want to say to Parks, thanks for hosting, man. I mean, this was really, I appreciate you having me on. I hope that my long-winded analysis was valuable for topics. And for those who tuned in and watched, thank you for watching. for those who may be watching this in a day or so when it's on the website in an article form, then thank you for watching after that. But it sounds like we'll be doing this every Wednesday, so please continue to stay tuned in. And if you have questions on anything I said on the show or want to continue the conversation with me, like just holler at me on Twitter. Like I don't bite. I'm just a esports fanatic like the rest of you guys. So holler at me and tell me my takes are bad. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for joining. I really appreciated having you on here for the first episode of Esports Weekly. Like you and I said, we will be back next Wednesday. We're going to talk about some more stuff going on. Please go find these guys on Twitter and myself. We have our handles on here. And we look forward to hearing the topics and things you guys want to focus on next week. So thank you so much. Have a great week. Stay safe. Wear your masks. Wash your hands. Don't go outside too much, but go outside a little bit because you need your sunny D. I mean, your vitamin D. You don't need sunny D. You could get that if you want.
I'm getting sunny D now.
We're all going to the store. But thank you all so much for watching. We really appreciate it. You can find us on invenglobal.com. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us back here on Twitch. Thank you so much.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere. Thank you so much, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.